The Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds and crushed 100 rebellions. Its fleets darkened the skies of civilizations that once believed themselves untouchable. Its warriors an unstoppable tide that swept through the cosmos, leaving only submission in their wake. The very idea that any single entity, any lone being, could stand against them was laughable. And yet, somewhere in the far reaches of their ever-growing dominion, an urgent distress signal crackled to life, broadcasting a message so absurd, so beyond comprehension, that it was at first dismissed as an obvious clerical error. One man, one human, 60,000 confirmed kills. The transmission came from an outpost on the fringe of Imperial territory, where the newly annexed world of New Earth had been little more than a footnote in the grand designs of conquest. The Empire, in its usual arrogance, had assumed humanity to be another primitive species in need of correction, rowdy, self-destructive, but ultimately unremarkable. Their technology was dated, their grasp of interstellar war amateur at best. They had neither the warships nor the firepower to challenge even the smallest sector fleet. And so, when whispers of an insurgent warrior reached the ears of the Imperial High Command, it was met with casual amusement rather than alarm. Commander Norvaxis of the 3rd Conquering Legion was the first to receive the report, though he barely spared it a glance. He had crushed entire planetary defenses with a wave of his clawed hand. His warriors, clad in the finest energy-resistant battle armor, had stormed fortresses thought impregnable. The idea that a single human, some outdated biological relic, was responsible for the complete annihilation of an entire strike force was too ridiculous to consider. Still, the bureaucrats insisted. The matter required attention. Imperial law dictated that threats, however minuscule, be addressed with appropriate force. Norvaxis took a sip of the rich, bitter drink that fueled his long shifts in the command station and activated the holomap before him. The tactical readout displayed New Earth in all its surreal wonder. A few cities, mostly underground due to the planet's harsh storms, a handful of industrial centers, and a minor defense force that barely warranted the term military. He sighed. The logistics of deploying another invasion force over such a small matter were inefficient, but if eliminating this so-called Baba Yaga would satisfy the Imperial bureaucrats and secure the system, without further reports clogging his terminal, then so be it. With a flick of his clawed fingers, he ordered the deployment of a full strike team. 1,000 of the Empire's best shock troopers, their armor impervious to ballistic weaponry, their training a lifetime of brutal efficiency. They would land, eliminate the target, and be back before the next cycle. Simple, predictable. Yet, even as he issued the command, something gnawed at him. A small, nearly forgotten instinct buried beneath years of unchallenged superiority. He dismissed it, unaware that this single decision would be remembered in the annals of history as the moment the Empire's doom began. The assault force arrived with the precision of a well-oiled war machine, descending upon New Earth like the wrath of a vengeful god. The landing was flawless. Their ships, sleek and silent, deployed wave after wave of warriors onto the soil of this unremarkable world. The target's location had been identified, a small, isolated structure on the outskirts of an abandoned human settlement. Tactical scans showed no reinforcements, no traps, no adwarnered weaponry. The human was alone. Commander Norvaxis smirked as he observed from orbit. The warriors spread in a crescent formation, their movements synchronized as they approached the structure. The lead trooper, a towering brute named Varric, activated his comm, target acquired. Preparing for elimination. A pause. A brief flicker of hesitation. Then static. A second later, all communication was lost. On the observation deck of his command vessel, Norvaxis straightened, his mandibles clicking together in irritation. This was unexpected. Through the live surveillance feeds, he watched as the strike team's vitals blinked out one by one. Red indicators flashed in rapid succession. 50 gone. 100. 300. The life signs vanished faster than he could process. It wasn't possible. It wasn't rational. The last surviving trooper managed to reactivate his communicator. Heavy, labored breathing filled the channel. He's not human. The soldier's voice was strained, his words barely coherent. He's a monster. We never had a chance. Norvaxis leaned forward. What happened? Report. But the soldier was already dead. The feed cut out with a sickening crunch. Silence. A tension unlike any the commander had ever known settled over the command center. Then another transmission. Not from his troops. From the surface. A single message. One sentence. No distortion. No interference. Just a calm, steady voice that sent an uncharacteristic shiver down his spine. Now you've done it. Norvaxis did not know fear. He had faced enemy fleets, watched the destruction of entire civilizations without hesitation. But something about those 4 words, spoken with the weight of quiet certainty, sent an instinctive pulse of unease through his entire being. He ordered an immediate retreat, but it was already too late. The battle wasn't beginning. It was already over. The killing had just started. Down below, on the surface of New Earth, John Warner emerged from the shadows of the ruin that had once been his home. His boots crunched against the soil, littered with the bodies of the invaders who had dared disturb his peace. A flick of his wrist, and a spent magazine clattered to the ground. He reloaded without looking. The Empire thought they had invaded New Earth. No, they had merely walked into his world. And they would pay the price. Commander Norvaxis had never known failure. From the moment he had hatched in the war broods of the Imperial Corps, he had been groomed for conquest. His name was spoken in reverence among the legions, whispered in fearful awe by those who had the misfortune of opposing him. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 36 worlds, each victory more decisive than the last. His warriors were the pinnacle of combat perfection, their training honed to mathematical precision. Mistakes did not exist in his campaigns. And yet, in the darkened war chamber aboard his flagship, his mind reeled from the reality of what had just occurred. 1,000 of the Empire's finest had been obliterated in under 10 minutes. A single human had done it. No adwarnered weaponry, no strategic reinforcements, just one man. The reports were inconceivable. A pencil? A coffee mug? The absurdity of it mocked every principle of warfare he had ever understood. The remaining officers in the command chamber shifted uneasily as they waited for him to speak. The silence was suffocating. The weight of their gazes burned into him, each of them knowing that this failure, this unthinkable humiliation, would not remain confined to this room for long. The Empire did not tolerate weakness. A misstep at this scale would be remembered for generations, a stain on his legacy that could never be scrubbed clean. No, that was unacceptable. This was not a defeat. It was an anomaly, a statistical aberration that demanded immediate correction. Norvaxis exhaled sharply and straightened, his posture rigid as he turned to face the gathered officers. "We miscalculated," he said, his voice even, controlled. "That is all. A single warrior, no matter how skilled, does not stand against an empire. He may have been underestimated once. It will not happen again." His second-in-command, a cold, calculating tactician named Raylasor, studied him carefully. "The soldiers we lost were not recruits," she said, her tone measured but firm. "They were elites, trained for planetary suppression. Whatever this human is, he is not ordinary. We must consider the possibility that conventional tactics will not." "Enough," Norvaxis snapped. "This is no god. This is no mythical force. He is flesh and bone. He bleeds. He dies. The only mistake was our approach." Raylasor hesitated. Her species, the reptilian Crevanti, were infamous for their unshakable logic, and he could see the calculations running behind her cold yellow eyes. He knew she disagreed, but she was disciplined enough not to challenge him outright. Norvaxis turned to the strategic display. "Deploy the next wave. 10,000 soldiers. Full combat gear. Mechs, drones, suppression squads. We burn him out. No more games. No more arrogance." Murmurs of assent rippled through the officers, though he could see the doubt lingering at the edges of their expressions. He ignored it. This time, the human would not walk away. The fleet moved swiftly. Battlecruisers descended upon New Earth in perfect formation, the sky darkening under their collective shadow. Dropships rained from the heavens like meteors, filling the air with a deafening roar of war engines. The ground trembled under the weight of Imperial war machines, towering mechanized walkers that had reduced entire cities to rubble in past campaigns. Swarms of automated drones soared ahead, scanning for any sign of the target. They found him standing alone in the center of an abandoned street, watching them arrive. The silence that followed was unnatural. For all the Empire's technological superiority, for all its countless victories, there was something deeply wrong about this moment. The human was unarmored, unfazed. He did not run, did not flinch. He simply stood, watching the invasion unfold around him as if it were an inconvenience rather than an act of war. Norvaxis, observing from orbit, clenched his jaw. He had seen warriors beg for mercy. He had seen rebels flee, their spirits breaking under the inevitability of Imperial rule. But he had never seen this. A lone soldier, standing on the front line against an army. The order was given. The first attack came from the aerial drones, their weapons locking onto their target with flawless precision. A barrage of plasma fire engulfed the human's position, turning the ground into molten slag. The sensors confirmed multiple direct hits. Smoke billowed from the impact site, the heat signatures fluctuating wildly. And then, through the haze, movement. John Warner emerged unscathed, his body twisting through the air with impossible fluidity. The drones that had targeted him were already falling from the sky, each of them hit with perfect accuracy. Shots fired with a pistol that, by all calculations, should not have had the range to reach them. Norvaxis barely had time to process the impossibility before the battle erupted into chaos. The mechs, massive constructs of Imperial engineering, adwarnered with unrelenting force, their weapons leveling buildings in their pursuit. Warner moved like a shadow, darting between crumbling debris with inhuman speed. A soldier lunged at him. He was dead before he could even register his mistake, his body crumpling to the ground in a heap. Another, then another. The death toll rose at an alarming rate. Warner wielded weapons with a precision that defied reason, each movement calculated, every bullet accounted for. He did not waste a step, did not hesitate. Every kill was a deliberate, artful execution. The mechs were the next to fall. Warner vanished from sight, reappearing in places the sensors could not predict, striking with methods that should not have been possible. He tore into the machines with weapons scavenged mid-combat, exploiting weaknesses no intelligence report had ever identified. The battlefield became a massacre. The Imperial comms, once filled with the confident voices of commanding officers, dissolved into panic screams. He's everywhere. Squad 4 is gone. I repeat, gone. He took down a walker with his bare hands. I can't. Static. Norvaxis clenched his fists, his claws digging into the console before him. This could not be happening. Raelazor's voice broke through the chaos, sharp and unwavering. We need to pull back. No, he snarled. We press forward. Her eyes flickered with something he could not name. Commander, she said carefully, we are losing. The word felt foreign to him. Losing. Not an inconvenience. Not a temporary setback. A defeat. Norvaxis refused to accept it. The orders for reinforcements were already being issued, but deep down, in the core of his being, he knew they would change nothing. He had seen great wars, had orchestrated the collapse of civilizations, had ruled the battlefield with a precision that no opponent had ever withstood. And yet, he had never faced something like this. He had never faced a force that did not break. John Warner did not fight like a soldier. He did not adhere to doctrine or formation. He was not bound by strategy in the way the Empire understood it. He was something else. Something old. Something relentless. The last transmission from the battlefield was a single broken whisper, spoken by one of the few remaining soldiers before he, too, was silenced. He's coming. Norvaxis felt the weight of those words settle deep within him. He had seen soldiers break before, He had seen the defeated beg for mercy. He had never seen warriors whisper in horror. This war was no longer a question of victory. It was a question of survival. Norvaxis had stopped speaking. The silence in the war chamber stretched long and cold, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of a failing transmission feed. The casualties from the second assault had been reported in real time. 10,000 elite warriors, gone. Mechs that had crushed planetary rebellions like insects, reduced to smoldering husks. Adwarner drones, programmed with predictive combat algorithms, shot out of the sky like children's toys. And through it all, one man had stood, unmoving, unshaken, cutting through their forces with an efficiency that defied all logic. For the first time in his career, Norvaxis found himself staring at an enemy that could not be explained away by poor strategy or inadequate preparation. It wasn't that John Warner had superior technology. It wasn't that he had an army or powerful allies. It was the fact that he wasn't losing. No matter how many they sent, no matter the strength of their weapons or the precision of their attacks, he never lost. The Emperor himself had now taken an interest. The message had arrived an hour prior, polite, professional, but carrying the unmistakable weight of imminent execution should the situation remain unresolved. Norvaxis had read it 3 times before crushing the data tablet in his claws. They were beyond conventional tactics now. They had to go bigger. He turned sharply to his officers, his voice cutting through the thick tension like a blade. Deploy the full armada. 500 warships. Orbital bombardment authorization granted. The room stiffened, some officers exchanging uneasy glances. Even Raylazor, ever the pragmatist, hesitated. Sir, I did not ask for your opinion, Norvaxis growled. That human is not a warrior. He is an infestation. We exterminate infestations. The command was executed immediately. The fleet's arrival was a spectacle of raw, imperial might. Hundreds of warships encircled New Earth like a metal storm, their sleek hulls glinting against the dim starlight. The Dread Fong, the largest battleship in the sector, took position at the forefront, its weapon systems primed and waiting. The order was given. From orbit, plasma rains fell upon the planet, each blast capable of leveling entire cities. The bombardment stretched for hours, reducing entire landscapes to molten ruin. Any lesser enemy would have been vaporized instantly, their resistance crushed before it had even begun. The first report arrived within minutes of the attack's conclusion. They had missed. The satellite imagery was reviewed. John Warner was still standing. The craters around him stretched for miles, the ground liquefied by the sheer force of the assault. But at the very center of the blast zone, untouched, unfazed, he stood. He looked up. The tactical officers flinched as the holoscreen zoomed in on his face. He was staring directly at them. The transmission feeds crackled with distress signals from the ground forces. He's still alive. He's looking at us. Oh no, he's moving. The feed cut out. Norvaxis felt something foreign coil in his gut, a sensation he refused to acknowledge as fear. Raylazor spoke first. Sir, we need to reconsider our approach. He exhaled slowly through his mandibles. You have a suggestion? A bounty, she said, voice steady. We use the galaxy itself against him. Every mercenary, every assassin, every rogue who sees an opportunity will come for him. Overwhelm him with numbers he cannot fight alone. Norvaxis nodded, if only because the alternative, admitting that their entire armada had failed, was unthinkable. Make it public. The announcement spread like wildfire through the galactic underworld. The bounty was 1 billion galactic credits, a sum so obscene that it sent ripples of excitement through every crime syndicate, every mercenary guild, every assassin's den in the universe. For one man. And they came. From every corner of the galaxy, warlords, bounty hunters, and cybernetic killers arrived, drawn by the promise of unimaginable wealth. Some were legends in their own right, seasoned warriors who had toppled governments, executed entire bloodlines, and hunted the most dangerous prey in the cosmos. Others were reckless opportunists, eager to carve their names into history. All of them thought they had a chance. The battle began at dusk, beneath the burning remains of what had once been a thriving colony. The first to arrive were the opportunists, brash, overconfident, thinking they could overwhelm him with sheer numbers. They died first. The seasoned assassins took a more measured approach, circling him like predators, testing his defenses, probing for weaknesses. They found none. The fight stretched through the night, bodies piling like offerings at the altar of an unseen god. Explosions shattered the silence, the scent of scorched metal and burning flesh thick in the air. But John Warner did not falter. He fought with the unrelenting precision of a machine, yet with the terrifying unpredictability of a man with nothing left to lose. The bounty hunters learned too late that this was not a contract. It was a mass execution. By dawn, the battlefield was silent. The bodies lay still. John Warner stood alone. The final survivor, a cybernetically enhanced warlord known as Calvarus, dropped his weapon. His augmented limbs trembled, the circuits in his exosuit sparking from the damage inflicted during the fight. He fell to his knees, panting. You're a monster." Warner reloaded his pistol. "Yeah." The shot echoed through the wasteland. In the Imperial war chamber, the silence had become unbearable. Norvaxis did not look at his officers. He did not acknowledge the growing sense of inevitability pressing down on them like a vice. But he could feel it. The Emperor's voice rang through the command channel. "You have failed me." It was not a statement. It was a death sentence. Norvaxis forced himself to stand tall. "Not yet," he said, though the weight in his voice betrayed the truth. Relisor spoke softly. "Sir, he's coming." He turned to the holoscreen. John Warner had acquired an Imperial battlecruiser. How, they didn't know, but he was flying it toward them. The officers scrambled for emergency protocols, but it was futile. The realization sank in. This was no longer about killing him. It was about surviving him. The bridge of the Imperial flagship was deathly silent. The officers who had once commanded fleets with unwavering confidence stood frozen, their gazes locked on the holoscreen. There, in stark, undeniable clarity, was the impossible sight that had shattered the illusion of their superiority. John Warner was coming for them. The USS Boogeyman, as the human had decided to rename the stolen battlecruiser, tore through space with alarming precision, maneuvering through the defensive perimeter as if it had been designed for his hand alone. It should have been impossible. Imperial warships required encrypted command codes, Neuralink controls attuned to their pilots. Yet, somehow, Warner had not only taken the ship, but mastered it in record time. The fleet scrambled to intercept. Warships repositioned. Defense turrets powered up. Dreadnoughts primed their main cannons. A last stand was forming, a desperate, disorganized attempt to delay what every officer in that room knew was inevitable. Commander Norvaxis watched it all unfold, his mind hollow. He had no orders left to give, no strategies left to enact. He had spent his life studying warfare, perfecting the calculus of battle, reducing conflict to a science. Yet John Warner had shattered the equations, broken the rules, made a mockery of every principle of war. A fleet of 500 Imperial warships stood between one man and the capital of the Empire. It would not be enough. The battle began with a violent ripple of cannon fire. The Imperial forces unleashed their full might upon the approaching vessel, streams of plasma and hyper-accelerated ordnance, filling the void of space. The Boogeyman did not slow. It danced. No machine should have been able to move like that. It weaved between energy blasts, skimmed the surface of enemy hulls at impossible angles, returned fire with calculated lethality. Warner was flying a battlecruiser the same way he fought on foot, precise, efficient, utterly relentless. Within minutes, 3 capital ships were down, their reactors detonating in blinding explosions. Then 5. Then 10. The fleet's formation fractured as panic spread, commanders screaming over the comms, officers barking conflicting orders. The once mighty war machine of the Empire crumbled under the weight of something it had never encountered before: pure, unfiltered human vengeance. nor Vaxus watched as ship after ship fell, the battle unraveling into complete disaster. The dreadnought Obsidian Wrath, once the pride of the fleet, was split in half with surgical precision, its remains scattering like debris in a storm. Every Imperial officer knew what came next. The capital, the Imperial throne world of Vecronia, the heart of the Galactic Empire, the seat of a civilization that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Its defenses, once thought impenetrable, now seemed meaningless. Because John Warner was coming. The Emperor himself stood before the Grand War Council, his regal robes pooling around him as he listened to the unfolding nightmare. The chamber was filled with the most powerful beings in the Empire, strategists, admirals, high-ranking officials, all of them now reduced to shaking, whispering figures, watching their empire disintegrate in real time. The Emperor's voice was calm, but beneath it, something cracked. Can he be reasoned with? No one answered. A static-filled transmission came through the main channel. The voice that followed was one they had never heard before, but one that had been etched into the minds of every survivor who had spoken of him. I'm here. The orbital defenses activated the moment the boogeyman entered Vecronia's atmosphere. Anti-aircraft batteries unleashed waves of destruction, the sky flashing with the sheer magnitude of their firepower. It didn't matter. Warner ejected mid-flight, leaving the stolen battlecruiser to crash directly into the Imperial Palace. The explosion rocked the planet, shock waves rippling across the city. The gilded halls of the Emperor's stronghold trembled under the impact, priceless relics and towering statues crumbling into dust. And then, through the smoke, the fire, the ruin, he walked. The corridors of the palace, once guarded by an army of elites, now stood littered with bodies. The last remnants of the Imperial Guard tried to stop him. They failed. He moved through them with quiet, effortless brutality. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Step by step, John Warner erased the last defenses of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The War Council chamber was silent when the doors finally opened. The Emperor, once a godlike figure who had ruled with unwavering authority, stood face to face with something beyond his comprehension. He had seen death before, had ordered the destruction of entire civilizations without blinking. But death had never walked into his throne room before. John Warner stood before him, bloodied but unbroken, his eyes dark with the weight of 60,000 dead. The Emperor did not beg. He knew there was no point. Instead, he exhaled softly, then spoke the words that no ruler of the Galactic Empire had ever uttered. We surrender. The words rang through the air, settling over the War Council like a funeral shroud. The great empire that had crushed thousands of worlds had now been undone by one man. John Warner did not react. He did not celebrate, did not offer words of triumph. He simply holstered his weapon, gave a single curt nod, and turned away. The war was over. The John Warner Peace Treaty was signed within the hour, its terms dictated entirely by one unyielding truth: leave Earth alone. Forever. The Empire agreed without protest. John Warner never returned to Vecronia, never gave another order, never made another demand. He left the same way he had arrived, silent, unstoppable. The galaxy did not forget. The stories spread like wildfire, taking on mythic proportions. The boogeyman of Earth became a cautionary tale, a whispered legend told in hushed voices. Civilizations that once eyed humanity for conquest now steered clear, their leaders haunted by the fate of the empire that had dared provoke the wrong man. And John Warner? He went home. New Earth was quiet, its people untouched, its sky clear. His robotic dog trotted beside him as he stepped into his house, the weight of battle still clinging to his bones. He poured himself a drink, sat down in the chair he hadn't used in years, and exhaled slowly. Peace. Maybe this time it would last. Maybe. John Warner closed his eyes and waited.